let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to moderate the second session. Well, frankly speaking, as far as more than 50% of participants speak Russian, I suppose it will be easier for me to moderate it in Russian, and we have good translators here also. Так что, уважаемые коллеги, мы переходим к работе второй сессии. Я думаю, она будет не менее живой и интересной, чем была наша первая сессия. И начать ее я хотел бы, наверное, с одного замечания, которое вчера высказал вечером профессор Махбубани. Он сказал, что нас ожидает еще немало сюрпризов. Немало сюрпризов в развитии мира и региона. И мне кажется, что одним из таких сюрпризов может стать создание зоны свободной торговли между Евразийским экономическим союзом и АСЕАН. Почему сюрпризом? Потому что сегодня, когда возникает разговор о создании такой зоны свободной торговли, ну, наверное, может быть, 80%, а то и 90% экспертов смотрят на это с большим скептицизмом. С большим скептицизмом. И в значительной степени этот скептицизм основан на определенном неверии в политику России на Тихом океане, в политику России в Юго-Восточной Азии. И вот наша первая сессия как раз этот скептицизм уже проявила. Вот. Так что тема очень острая, и, наверное, это как раз все-таки тот самый институт роста, институт развития, который можно назвать реальным, возможным, да, но нелегко достижимым. У нас сегодня 3 замечательных докладчика, 3 высокопрофессиональных экономиста. Они люди конкретные. И очень здорово, что на эту проблему мы можем посмотреть как бы с 3 сторон. Со стороны Евразийского экономического союза тему представит профессор Афонтсев. Со стороны Юго-Восточной Азии профессор Chen Kang. Ну и профессор Jae-Young, он как бы между. Он как бы вроде бы в нейтральной позиции, хотя у Кореи свой интерес к зоне свободной торговли с Россией, и это отдельная, наверное, тема. У нас не так много времени, поэтому я прошу докладчиков придерживаться регламента, ну и максимально, как договаривались, 7-10 минут. Профессор Афонтсев, пожалуйста.
Thank you very much to the moderator. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to continue our line for using both special languages of the conference. I'd like to focus on a number of questions which will determine in the next years the policy of collaboration of Russia with countries of Southeast Asia, including ASEAN countries. I must mention that some of the forecasts which are going to be made are related to the development of political events, of certain leaders of certain countries. Here I'm not very confident because I am an economist and politicians are more familiar with criminology, and now they're studying new discipline. I don't know, maybe it's going to be called White Houseology. Nobody knows what it is going to be called. We don't know what administration is going to be, but based on the information that we have, we can expect weakening of the tendencies in establishing investment alliances in Asia-Pacific region. From one side, there is a dubious position of currently elected President in terms of development of TPP, as the president doesn't see it the way the previous president saw it. At the same time, we see a very prominent trend in weakening of alternative partnerships. If you look at the initiatives of the past few years, and we were trying to counter-propose something to the Western Bloc, where China came up with the Shanghai Partnership. For Russia, it was development of free trade zones on Shanghai Organization of Cooperation. And I think this race will help develop the economic bloc, and everything will come back to its economic roots. So the less geopolitics informing the trade blocs, the less dependency we will have on the principle of exclusivity, and more consideration of the real interests of business, and not hypothetical and rather detached interests by those who make political decisions. What does it mean for relationship of Russia with its partners in the Southeast Asia region? There will be a shift in priorities towards forming blocs and agreements between Russian Federation and Eurasian Economic Union and some of the countries of Southeast Asia and some countries of ASEAN. Why am I skeptical about the perspectives of coming to such agreements between Eurasian Economic Union from one side and ASEAN bloc in general? Firstly, the reason is with heterogenic interests of the countries themselves. And in this case, we were witnessing certain discussions on this topic, and I'm sure that we're going to have more discussions on this. Some of these were with my colleagues and experts, and they have shown that it's very difficult to come to terms with a group of countries. For many countries have their own interests, economic interests. Some of them disagree on establishing their partnership with certain groups to become recipients, or some are investors on the territory of Russian Federation. We have seen that it is very difficult to come to common terms in these kind of collaboration. The other problem is in the nature of the Eurasian Economic Unit itself. This bloc was created in the format of the customs union, which cover the sphere of the common market. But when it comes to Eurasian Economic Union, we do not have one common policy which would cover free trade zones. This is the sphere of investment and technological collaboration. And each country of the Eurasian Union is keeps independency in each of those spheres. Therefore, the negotiations between the partners takes two tracks. First is the Eurasian Economic Committee, which is conducted in the format of trade negotiations, and on the other side, negotiations with the country, specifically with each country which is part of the economic union, on subjects like investment and collaboration. This is a very difficult to achieve format, as shown by the experience that we had with Vietnam, even in the separate countries. Technologically and In terms of expertise, it is very difficult to collaborate with 10 countries at the same time. Now, with regard to what I consider realistic, negotiations between Russia, Eurasian Economic Union, and some of the countries of the South and Southeast Asia. We can have all the formats where negotiations are held between Russia and these countries can be conducted on non-preferential and preferential trade agreements, agreement between countries of Eurasian Union on social and trade regimes, and trade agreements where Eurasian Union negotiates directly with the countries and with ASEAN in general. All these formats are possible. These are all pragmatic agreements, and we are ready to realize these formats. A small comment on the question which was raised during the previous session. Russia is offering something. Russia is insisting on certain formats of collaboration. Why do we need to participate in them? You see, yes, possibly these problems come up in the sphere of political collaboration, in the sphere of security, but the economic collaboration, we don't have such problems being raised. These negotiations are negotiated by our partners, not ourselves. The dialogue with Vietnam was initiated by Vietnam. The beginning of negotiations with the Republic of Korea was initiated with our Korean partners. The same goes with the perspective of developing free trade with Singapore or other countries of Eurasian continent, for example, Israel. Israel has also expressed its willingness to collaborate with Eurasian Economic Union, just like before it used to initiate the collaboration with the Russian Federation. So, therefore, I would not agree with such interpretation of the economic logic that, okay, let's throw something impossible and later on come to terms and give in on certain issues. No. We have a product. If you are willing to pay and ready to pay, we can start negotiations. We can offer you this, 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 and if you want to buy this, 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 then therefore you can come back to us and offer us opening certain markets, certain security of technology transfer on certain conditions, or propose to conduct negotiations on a certain concrete subject. This is another advantage of the bilateral format, to have certain special exclusions which have been offered to Vietnam by the Russian Federation, and vice versa. They were related only to the relationship with Vietnam. They were not related to negotiations to collaboration with other countries, because certain terms are not applicable to other countries. That's why the bilateral format is different. It cannot, some of the terms cannot be applied to other countries. And I'm very glad that here at this table we have representatives of countries with which Eurasian Union has been discussing the possibility of developing a free trade zone and expanding the technological and investment collaboration. All the calculations that have been made by myself and my colleagues in the Institute of International Relations and Academy of Public Policy And we don't see any problems in forming similar agreements with Singapore. And we expect growth of GDP and increase of economic advantages to the countries which will be involved in collaboration with Singapore companies. It's a bit different when it comes to the Republic of Korea. Here we'll have to work on very complicated issues, the development of trade in electronic or metallurgic products, which may affect our relationship with Korea, with Belarus, for example. Therefore, our Belarus partners and therefore some of these terms we would need further discuss with Koreans, maybe with participation with Belarus partners whom we are dealing with. But the most important thing is that this can be solved on mutual understanding principles. And I hope that our development in trade agreements with partners in Southeast Asia and South Asia will increase. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor AFONTSEV. Despite the fact that we started from such a pessimistic note, I think the end of this presentation was rather optimistic. And I think there's something very prominent here that we see from the presentation of our professor. Russia is really interested in developing free trade zones, including with countries of the ASEAN. So therefore, currently the ball is on the ASEAN side, and I would like to invite our...
Thank you, Chairman. I want to make 3 comments. The first comment is from the views of ASEAN on the trades between the ASEAN and Euro-Asian, and with the focus particularly on Russia, because Russia is the largest economy within the Euro-Asian Economic Union. The second comment is on the relationship between the ASEAN EAEU free trade and the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is basically ASEAN 10+6. The third comment is on the influence of Donald Trump. I think many people mentioned this in the previous panel. If you look at the current initiative, the free trade between the ASEAN and Euro-Asian Economic Union, it was proposed by Russia in the summit in Sochi in May. And I think ASEAN countries generally welcome this proposal. But we are watching. We want to see what's the details about the cooperation mechanism. And therefore, some observations can be made based on the stylized facts. I think many people mentioned in the earlier panel that the Russia does not have a big presence in this part of the world. Unlike EU, United States, China, and other North Asian countries, Russia has not been a major trading partner to ASEAN. In the last 10 years, Russia's share in the trade actually doubled, which is a big improvement. However, Russia in the year of 2015, the last year, accounts for only 0.6% of the ASEAN's total trade, 0.3% of ASEAN's export, and 0.9% of ASEAN's import. So in terms of scale, it's very small. And among the items in the trade, oil remained to be the largest item among the imports from Russia. When the volume of the oil import reduced dramatically in the last year, the total value of import from Russia decreased to US dollar 9.8 billion from 17 billion in the previous year, which is 42% reduction. And you can see that the trade is concentrated on the oil. Now, we discussed what's the factors affecting the trade between Russia and ASEAN. Well, economists have identified the following factors. The first one is a high transportation cost. This is the problem of geometry, long distance from Russia to ASEAN. The second problem is information gap, and probably language is a problem. Like today we have two languages, Russian and English. So in the negotiation between ASEAN and Euro-Asian, the negotiation will be, again, use the English and Russian interchangeably. But on the ground, when you have the investors, when you have the trade companies, the language could be a problem. The third one is legal conditions and regulatory framework. And basically that's the business environment or business climate. But in this aspect, I think after Russia's accession to WTO, I think the business climate improved quite a lot. There's further complications and exist if the primary objective of pivot to Asia or turn to the east is to integrate Siberia and Russian Far East into the fast-growing economic system of Asian Pacific regions. The Far East is actually a less productive region in Russia. From 2006 to 2015, the share of agricultural production of the Siberia and Russian Far East actually dropped from 18% to 15%. The share of industrial production hovered around 15 to 16%. The working age population decreased faster than the nation as a whole, reducing its share from 18.4% to 17.5%. And the share of urban population also declined slightly. I think the Far East is actually, the urbanization process is lag behind the national average. So underpopulation together with underdeveloped infrastructure present the foreign investor with a further challenge. Professor Huang Jin mentioned about foreign investor making money, and he explained why the Russian Far East need to be attractive in terms of attracting the foreign investors. The investor, if they come to Far East, they will need to do two things. One is they want to produce for the market. That means that they will produce the product in Russian Far East for the Far East market. But that's not the place where the consumer size is growing. Another is to produce as a location which has a location advantage, and which means the cheaper production cost, and produce it for other part of the markets. But then if you move inland into the Far East, the transportation cost will be really high, and that's another hindrance. So in terms of the FDI-induced trade, there will be additional problems there. So if the trade need to be improved between the Russia and ASEAN, other parts of Russia would need to come in to boost the trade. Of course, the low base of the trade relationship and the challenge present above should not be viewed as negatively and could actually mean a large potential for both parties. Let me turn to the second comments on the relationship between ASEAN and EAEU FTA and the RCEP. Well, TPP is dead. And when TPP is dead, I think Professor Roderick mentioned that we should not cry for TPP because it's not actually that grand. As people try to mention that TPP is a new century's free trade agreement and is not only on the tariff barrier, but also in non-tariff barrier. But we can see the attitude immediately change. Japan, Australia, and Malaysia show strong interest in the RCEP negotiation recently. And ASEAN will certainly give priority to RCEP for the following reasons. First, the 10 plus 6, those 6 countries, China, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India, they are traditional partners. And secondly, ASEAN have the free trade agreement with all the 6 individual countries. So we have the ASEAN plus 1. And thirdly, harmonization of FTA will gain considerable benefit for ASEAN, because currently those free trades will cut through all the complex rule of origin, the production chains, and therefore hinder the countries to benefit from the free trade. So I think ASEAN will give the priority to the RCEP. And therefore, the ASEAN EAEU FTA will need to follow RCEP. And whatever the negotiation in the RCEP will have an impact on the negotiation between ASEAN and the EAEU, the Euro-Asian area. And whether this negotiation is following the negative list approach or tariff removal ratio remain to be seen. And if we look at the EAEU FTA with Vietnam, it seems to follow some sort of the negative list approach. So some items like sugar, milk, meat, engine, and some textile goods are included in the list to be protected from the Euro-Asian area. But for RCEP, it's more likely to set a higher standard of tariff removal ratio. And source near closer to negotiation says that the removal ratio will be about 90 to 95%. So they have already been achieved by most of the ASEAN plus 1 free trade agreement, and therefore the country will go for it. So if that is the case, then we'll see the negotiation will drive to that direction, and that will affect the Euro-Asian ASEAN negotiation as well. Let me turn to the last point on the influence of Donald Trump. Well, although Donald Trump has said a lot of things, and we don't know whether we need to take it serious or not, but Donald Trump actually reflects the important trend. That is, the US is becoming a reluctant hegemon. In the global collective action, when we have 200 countries, the collective action problem is huge. And according to Professor Mansour Olson, there's a need to have a big player. That player will benefit from the collective action by a great margin, and therefore he will pay for the cost of negotiation. But during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump accused the NATO countries, saying that they are free riders, and he wants to make them pay, right? And how do they pay up is not clear. But this is what actually the US have been paying. First, US has been shouldering the defense cost. So calculating on the defense budget, I think US shoulder about 72% of NATO's defense budget. And secondly, in the multilateral negotiation in GATS or WTO, US is the big brother. This big brother is giving some concessions, try to bring the small player into the game. And in the Doha round of WTO negotiation, it's clear that US is no longer willing to play this role. And it is understandable, because if in 1945, after the World War II, the US is a real big brother, It is true because U.S. share of the world GDP was more than 50% at the time. Today, the U.S. share dropped below 20%. So when it's true that what benefit the world will benefit the U.S., this will be no longer true now, and therefore U.S. is less willing to play this role. And in the ASEP negotiation, it depends on whether China is willing to play this role now, and we will see very soon. But the complication is that in ASEP, India is also one of the players. And when India is involved, and China probably is less willing to play this role. And as Professor Wang already mentioned, that India and China already have a big the trade imbalance. And this negotiation, again, will not be easy. So I will stop just here.
Давайте поаплодируем.
Thank you very much, Professor. After your presentation, the optimism with regards to the future of the free trade zone between the Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN has increased. And I think only two factors can increase this process is China and United States. China, in terms of developing free trade zones with Russia, I think changes in policies by Donald Trump could lead to such increase, hopefully. Let's hear what...
Thank you, Chair, for introduction. Today, I'd like to talk about toward the EAEU ASEAN FTA. What kind of opportunities and restrictions we can expect? Look at this slide. In terms of FTA relation, ASEAN had actively involved in bilateral trade with neighboring countries. It completed 6 ASEAN plus 1 FTA with China, Korea, Japan, India, Australia, and New Zealand. Also, there has been FTA negotiation among ASEAN plus 6 countries since 2014. Contrary to ASEAN, European Economic Union, EAEU, is relatively new in FTA market. The only FTA in which EAEU participates is EAEU-Vietnam FTA. Even though EAEU is a newcomer in FTA, there are several FTAs under negotiation and under consideration, as well as such as FTA negotiations with EFTA and New Zealand, something like that. Let's move on to the next slide. This table shows the basic macroeconomic indicator of EAEU. EAEU has 180 million population. The total GDP reached to $1.6 trillion in 2015. The volume of trade reached $579 million with $37.4 million export and $205 million of imports. With respect to external economic relation, the volume of trade and foreign direct investment are relatively on small scale. ASEAN, with 629 million population, it has been shown steady and consistent economic growth for last 3-4 years. The volume of trade is more than 3 times larger than EAEU. Its total export reached to $1.2 trillion and import was $1.1 trillion in 2015. Next. We can see in this table, in figure, ASEAN's trade with the EAEU is mostly with Russia. Therefore, to see the importance of ASEAN as EAEU's trading partner, this slide shows Russia trade with major economic reasons. In Russian trade, European Union is the largest trading partner. About half of Russian trade happened with European Union. On the other hand, trade with APEC countries has been increased from 15.3% in 2000 to 28.1% in 2015. Even though the bilateral FTA would be mutually beneficial for both EAEU and the ASEAN, the negotiation may face some difficulties. First factor we can think of is that there is no leading countries among ASEAN. FTA between EAEU and ASEAN is a bilateral FTA, but unlike EAEU, ASEAN is not custom union. That is, each of 10 ASEAN members country can have its own voice in the negotiation. Especially ASEAN's decision is based on consensus, which means that if there is one country who refuses to take a certain matter, ASEAN cannot take it. That could slow down the negotiation and or make it difficult to proceed. Such difficulty arose in the ASEAN-EU FTA. Secondly, various levels of economic development among the participating countries would be another factor. The participating countries ranges from least developed economies such as Laos, Myanmar, to developing economies such as Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, to developed economies such as Singapore. Due to such differences among the members, there exist various opposition with regard to trade liberalization among and between. It would be uneasy to find out harmonizing points or common interest among them. The fact that there is no common background among the participating countries could make the negotiation process difficult. The countries have different cultural, historical, and religious background. Lastly, how to ensure an effective implementation if the FTA enters into force should be a challenging one. EAEU has only one FTA, which is with Vietnam FTA, lacking of experience in utilizing FTA. ASEAN, on the other hand, has plenty of FTA experience. However, its utilization rate of FTA in trade in goods is known as quite low. Korean, for example, Korean ASEAN FTA, the utilization rate for Korean export to ASEAN is one of the lowest in Korea's FTA. With the lack of FTA experience and the implementation capacity of participating country, finding out the way of overcoming this would be the challenging issue in EAEU-ASEAN FTA. Considering these factors, we can anticipate that the bilateral FTA between EAEU and ASEAN will be relatively low level of trade and service liberalization. Large number of participating countries, different level of economic development, no leading dominating countries in ASEAN make it difficult to reach high level in good and service market liberalization. Therefore, in this case, the trade and service liberalization is limited. In case of Korea, ASEAN FTA, trade liberalization is about 90% in tariff lines and import value for Korea and ASEAN countries. service liberalization is very marginal. Investment liberalization is still working on its concession list. However, EAEU-ASEAN FTA will provide a great opportunity to strengthen the economic cooperation between the two regions. It will contribute to deepen the regional value chain, combining natural resource and or materials in EAEU with production capacity and the labor force in ASEAN. Also, we can expect a high promotion effect. The bilateral FTA will bring positive impact on trade between CLMV, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and the other EAEU members than Russia. Such promotion effect will provide good opportunity of widening the economic relation and the cooperation between the two regions. Thank you for your attention.
Уважаемые коллеги, мы прослушали 3 доклада. Вот интересное складывается впечатление. Все говорят о огромном потенциале, о заинтересованности.
Everybody's talking about the potential, the interest, potential, 3, the interest, but somehow we are not talking on how we can solve these problems. We are talking about problems, but we are not talking about the solutions. There is some kind of pessimism, which is based on certain formats, on transportation costs, which are very high, the Far East is not developed properly, and so on and so forth. It's a kind of boring. Okay, Timofey Bardachov and Jae-Young. Let's listen to 3 questions.
Just two questions. Well, the first question to my friend Lee Jae-Young. Lee, you did with Russian partners, you did a tremendous study on the potentials of the FTA between Eurasian Economic Union and Korea, and this effort is very much appreciated, I must say, by the Russian government and by the Eurasian Economic Commission. Well, but at the same time, we all do believe in the free market. We all do believe that the market should regulate the economy and it should settle the things. But we know that in certain cases, the governments need to take an extra effort to make it easier for the businessmen to come. As you say, that, for example, Russian Far East, yes, Russian government must do a certain extra effort. But not only Russian government. Well, every government must do an extra effort to improve the economic environment. Well, in case of the potential FTA between Eurasian Economic Union and the Republic of Korea, we need to make sure that it will go beyond traditional FTA.
Timofey, please be shorter, because we have a limited time.
That it will cover not only the issues of trade, but also the issues of investment, for example. Investment is very important for every country of the Eurasian Economic Union. Do you see what might be the instruments to assure the investment from investors from Republic of Korea coming to Eurasian Union after such an agreement will be signed? This is the first question. And the second question is to Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, in the beginning of your presentation, you said that the Russian agricultural sector experienced certain difficulties after the collapse of the Soviet Union and still needs a lot of improvement. But at the same time, how would you explain the fact that after China and Russia reached an agreement on the Chinese non-tariff barrier, removal of some Chinese non-tariff barriers for agricultural imports, the exports of Russian wheat to China increased in 2016 for 164%. So maybe we can ask the question, what can be fixed not only on the Russian market and not only in the Russian legal environment, but also in the recipient countries? I mean, we speak about free trade, but we always forget about non-tariff barriers. And in the Asian countries, the non-tariff barriers is a very particular thing. What homework must be done, in your view, by the ASEAN countries in order to make the markets more open, in order to remove non-tariff barriers which are more significant than tariff ones? Thank you.
Your question, please.
Спасибо большое. Учитывая, что у нас как бы язык модерации на русском языке, то есть я могу и на английском, и на русском, без проблем в равной степени. Но
Thank you very much. There are 2 languages here. My name is Aziz Umarov. I'm advisor on the investments with the Singapore office. My question is for Mr. AFONTSEV. I don't know whether it's a good thing or not. I'm an economist by education and also have a degree in politology. I'm experiencing a cognitive dissonance because our first session was concerned with political issues, and now we're talking about economics. So we are here facing a dichotomy. So we're saying that two countries have decided to engage in trade and economic issues. And now our colleagues are repeating this is not a G2G issue. If investors are keen to go into another country, it is their decision. It means by this stage, the G2G issues have been resolved. So let's look at what attracts investors into certain countries or regions. This is not about political blocks or transport corridors. So we are talking about competence of the economy. So what are the key characteristics that attract investors? Maybe the low costs associated with administering business in a country. How favorable is the regulatory base? And I googled 3 countries according to this rating: the United States of America, Singapore, and China. So USA is number 3, Singapore is number 2 among 140 economies, and China number 28. So besides the fact that China is a superpower and there are Chinese investors all around Southeast Asia, China is taking tremendous steps to reform its public service area. They're learning English. I lived in Guangzhou 10 years ago, and even then there was a widespread program and for learning English, and they attracted only those from native English-speaking countries. So here's my question. When the world is changing, the key criteria is the attractiveness of the economy when the state can offer favorable economic conditions. So we are talking about economic diplomacy. So business interests have a way forward. So as a person who lived in the former Soviet Union, I do consider that there's a huge potential, but Russia is still unable to sell itself effectively. So we would need to change our rhetoric and transform it towards attracting investors by showing our potential, our economic potential, and our people, because we still are not keen with packaging. So the question is to Mr. AFONTSEV, do you think it's possible or not? Okay, Mr. Chen.
Информации, да?
Yes, Mr. Chen Kang mentioned it. He said that there was not enough information because there's insufficient information about.
Chen goes to Professor AFONTSEV. So you're not very much optimistic about the future of formation of free trade area between the EAEU and ASEAN. And I feel almost a similar feeling from the speech of Professor Chen, that from the side of ASEAN, it is not also not very optimistic about it. As a matter of fact, ASEAN is not a big market for Russia, and not big for trade partner for Russia and EAEU. And it makes only about 3% in Russia's trade structure, and it's not a big market for Russia's oil and energy. And I do not think it's a big potential market for Russia's food products, on which Russia relies a great hope. So my question is, so in that case, under these conditions, why Russia choose ASEAN as a top priority for promotion formation of free trade areas? What's the major motivation? Thank you.
Okay, 3 minutes for each.
Спасибо, интересные это вопросы.
Thank you. The questions were indeed interesting. As it was said earlier, yes, okay, I do consider that if Korea and Eurasian Economic Union can deal in such way that Korea lowers its non-tariff barriers, we should pay more attention to investments and industrial cooperation with Eurasian Economic Union, because I think just lowering non-tariff barriers, this would favor Korea, but for such countries as Belarus or Armenia, this would be something too complex. So we should create an opportunity here, and in this regard, we have carried out a study with Korean partners, and we have agreed on a new formula. But how can it be implemented? States should create an institutional platform for development of business.
For example, in 2006, when Korea did not have any strategy towards Central Asia, and I organized a group. We created a Korean strategy for Central Asia. And what happened? In 10 years, we now have good relationships with Central Asia, with Kazakhstan. The GDP is 1/8 of Russia, and Korean direct investment into Kazakhstan are higher than with Russia. This stimulates the role that the government can play. And also, when we have free trade agreements based on simulation, you can have high effect of GDP. But when Chile and Korea came up with free trade agreement, we were waiting for some increase in certain numbers. But in reality, after 3-4 years, we saw growth 3-4 times more than we actually expected. This is promotional effect. People meet, exchange ideas, information. So then the trade and investment will increase. And recently, in the beginning of November, in Korea, we organized a large expo, and we invited 5 EAEU countries. We introduced these countries to the Korean domestic businessmen as investment partners from Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and other countries. This also helps. But also I wanted to narrate to you in brief. In Korea, it's time to restructure the industry. We have invested a lot into shipbuilding. also metallurgic industry, also chemical industry. But now Korea, internal investment is managed by the foreign investments. It is time to invest overseas in countries of the EAEU. And we are interested in concluding as many agreements as possible with those countries, and then the investment will come into the market of the EAEU countries. Thank you.
Okay, mine will be short because it's a clarification. I did not say Russia did not have a strong agriculture. What I said is that Siberia and Russian Far East, compared to the Russian as a whole, have been lag behind in productivity, even in agriculture. The data I cite is the share of agriculture production of Siberia and Far East is dropping from 18% to 15%. So Russia is a great agriculture country. But on the issue of the non-tariff barrier and how ASEAN can reduce that, I think some ASEAN countries are ready, but some are not ready. For instance, Singapore is ready, and therefore Singapore is very active in TPP. But as we know that ASEAN countries are heterogeneous, and there are many less developing countries, and therefore this issue will be addressed outside the ASEAN purview, and I think that will be the case. Yeah.
Коллеги, я постараюсь.
Colleagues, I'll try to answer briefly. With regards to the first question, which includes three questions. Yes, economic diplomacy in the modern world is one of the key aspects that should move the development in the world. The trade agreements, the rhetorics, and the promotion of the country. It is not diplomacy, it is promotion. And as experience has shown, when you make stress on certain rhetoric accessories, this does not bring any great effect. We remember how much we spend in our country for the development of image of our country, and we did not achieve much. The real objective is to create environment to facilitate the environment for the development of trade and attracting investment by the governments from the both sides. I mentioned, and I'm convinced that the magic of large numbers is actually black magic, because when you calculate everything as a whole, it becomes not very interesting, and it shouldn't be done, and it's not necessary. But when you talk with concrete companies and how to attract investment, you see, G2G does not secure investment, does not guarantee the investment. The investment is attracted on the government-to-business level. So when you're talking about those chains on the high topic of realization of such agreements, and we need to understand what we need to do. But we need to remove the basic barriers which are not helping us to develop. It's no point on inviting investors, promise something to him. When an investor tells you that there are certain barriers, that he is experiencing certain barriers, there's no point in continuing the dialogue if you are not helping remove those barriers which the investor himself has identified. So just imagine the seashore after the storm, and there are a lot of starfishes on the shore. There are two people. One picks up the stars and throws them back in the sea, and the other one comes and says, "Hey, you're crazy. You can't save all the starfishes." And he says, "Yes, I can't save all the fishes, but this particular fish I have already saved," and he throws it in the sea. So we can't expect to have all agreements with Vietnam, with Singapore, that they will help save economy of Russia, but specific companies will start hiring people, will start developing the economies. And why Russia has chosen ASEAN? Yes, we see some contradictions between them. Yes, when politicians try to discuss trade agreements, they don't really see the trade blocks, and they see them as continuation, as military blocks. And when last year we achieved success in voting for the TTP, not only in Russia but also in China, we came up with an idea of proposing something to counter that. We wanted to develop to Shanghai Organization, but we started with the format of dialogue, of negotiations and discussions, and this has been in discussion for more than half a year, and we see that ASEAN as well as Shanghai Organization, we see that there are some serious questions being raised, but bilateral format gives opportunity to come up with mutually beneficial terms and environment. If you are going to have, we are not looking at developing agreements where we're going to have 100% liberalization. We are looking at agreements. We are looking at agreements that will bring investments, that will bring money. If we can compensate and have 50% exclusions and 50% liberalization, as long as it brings the money, it's already a good result. For example, we can see on the examples of two Koreas how they are winning in terms of their GDP. If we can come up with bilateral terms which will help increase the GDP, I think we will achieve our target. That's my economist's point of view. Well, colleagues, I think we had a very interesting session, and the topic, of course, is very sensitive, opened, and still a lot to discuss. And regardless of how we are going to continue negotiations on the free trade zone development, I wanted to mention one exact thing here, that we can, within the framework of Valdai Club, we can create maybe a second trend. We have already started this new trend, a new way. This is the second session, and we are raising up the question of Far East. I think we should develop a session of Valdai Club in the Far East and see ourselves how the agriculture is developing there, and discuss all the rest of the transport and logistics there and then. So let's thank our presenters today and welcome them again. And now we are going out for break until 2 o'clock.